It's kind of funny. Most companies today are absolutely drowning in data, but they're starving for actual insights. So, in this explainer, we're going to look at how organizations can stop all that chaos and start building a real data strategy, one that creates a serious competitive advantage. Okay, let's get into it. In today's business world, data is basically the new electricity, right? It's supposed to be this clean energy powering everything from marketing to operations to big picture strategy. But for so many companies, instead of a clean power grid, it feels more like this tangled mess of wires that just shorts out every time you try to plug something new in. I mean, does this sound at all familiar? You go out and you hire these brilliant data scientists, and they end up spending 80% of their time just cleaning up messy data. Your finance team is stuck for days, literally days, just trying to reconcile reports that don't even match up. And maybe the worst part? When an insight finally does bubble up to the surface, the decision makers don't even trust the numbers because the foundation is so shaky. Look, these aren't just little daily frustrations. All this stuff adds up to a huge competitive liability. Let's start by really digging into the true cost of all this data chaos. Let's just pause on this number for a second. 80%. I mean, just let that sink in. That's how much time and money is just wasted preparing data, not actually analyzing it. Think about it. It's like paying a world-class chef to spend 4 out of every 5 days just scrubbing pots and pans. That's exactly what most companies are doing with their best data talent. It's crazy. And this points to this massive disconnect. You open up any annual report and you'll see the words, "Data is our most critical asset." But then you look at the reality inside the company and, well, it tells a very different story. Data projects are underfunded, executive buy-in isn't really there, and every single department is off doing its own thing in its own little silo. And the result of all this chaos is something the source material brilliantly calls pipeline jungles. And man, is that the perfect metaphor. You've got these thick, tangled thickets of expensive data connections that were built on the fly. No one really owns them. Everyone is terrified to even touch them, and they're just a total nightmare to maintain. So, how do we get out of the jungle? Well, it all starts with a really fundamental shift in mindset. We have to stop seeing data as just this exhaust, this byproduct of doing business, and start seeing it as a core business asset that has its own real value proposition. And there's actually a name for this mindset. It's called Infonomics. It's basically the economic discipline of treating information just like any other asset on your balance sheet, as something you need to manage, measure, and, yes, monetize with real discipline. But that kind of begs a huge question, one that even accountants have struggled with for a while. Is information really an asset in the way we traditionally think about assets? Well, what makes information such a wild and incredibly powerful asset is that it completely breaks all the traditional rules. Okay, so a normal asset, like a company truck, is rivalrous. If I'm using it, you can't. It's also depletable. It gets used up, it wears out. Information, it's the total opposite. It's non-rivalrous. The entire sales team can use the same customer data at the exact same time, and it's non-depletable. Using the data doesn't use it up. This makes it pretty much infinitely scalable. Okay, so adopting this new mindset is step one, for sure. But how do you actually turn that philosophy into practice? Well, you need a blueprint. You need a clear roadmap to get from total chaos to clarity, and that's a formal data strategy. A really solid data strategy stands on 4 key pillars. It all has to start with vision. What are we even trying to do with this data? Then you need governance. What are the rules of the road? That's supported by your architecture. How are we actually going to build this data supply chain? And finally, it all comes down to people and culture. How do we make the whole company fluent in data? But here's the thing. Inside every organization, there's this constant push and pull. You've got the central corporate team, and they want control and standards, for security and efficiency. But then you have the business units out on the front lines, and they need the freedom to be fast, to experiment, and to innovate. A great data strategy has to solve for both sides of that equation. And a proven way to do that, a really mature model, is called the hub and spoke. So you have a central hub, often led by a chief data officer, that sets the standards, provides the tools, and manages that core enterprise data. Then the spokes are data experts who are actually embedded in the different business units. They use all those central resources to generate specific insights and drive value right where it's closest to the customer. It really is the best of both worlds.
All right, so we've got the mindset, we've got the blueprint, but does this stuff actually work? Does it pay off? Let's take a look at the results and see the real tangible impact a data strategy can have.
And the evidence, wow, it's pretty startling, actually. Research shows that the companies at the top quartile in data and analytics capability, have operating margins that are a full 8 percentage points higher than the companies at the bottom. That is not a small difference. That is a massive performance gap. And that value really comes from two different places. A good data strategy helps you run the business better, driving efficiency, cutting costs. But, and this is crucial, it also helps you grow the business by fueling innovation and creating totally new ways to make money. But, and this is a big but, here is a super common trap, a classic failure point. A company produces this brilliant report, hands it over to a client, and the client just says, "This is great, but what am I supposed to do with it?" An insight that doesn't lead to an action is, let's be honest, completely worthless. The most successful companies, they solve this with what's called actioned analytics. They don't just hand you a dashboard and say, "Good luck." No, they bundle the insight with an automated action. So, for example, TripBam didn't just report that hotels were out of compliance. They created alerts that automatically emailed those hotels with a warning. See? They close the loop from insight to action. So, we have the right mindset, we have a clear blueprint, and we have proof that it works. But none of this just happens on its own. And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most critical piece of the puzzle, the catalyst. This whole revolution needs a leader. Because at the end of the day, a strategy is just a piece of paper, right? A document isn't going to change a company's culture. It's not going to go in and untangle that pipeline jungle. So who is actually responsible for making this revolution happen? And this is exactly why we've seen the dramatic rise of the Chief Data Officer, or CDO. This is a real C-suite leader whose entire job, their whole charter, is to execute the data strategy and make sure the organization is using data as a true enterprise asset. But not all CDOs are created equal. The role itself has changed a ton. The first-generation CDO was all about playing defense, focused on governance, compliance, cleaning up the mess. But the modern second-generation CDO, they are all about playing offense. Their focus is on creating value, driving innovation, and directly monetizing the company's data assets. And that really brings us to the final question, the one you should be asking about your own organization. Right now, at this very moment, is your data a hidden liability, tangled up in those pipeline jungles and creating risk? Or are you actually treating it and leading it like the most valuable asset you have? Because that choice, well, it makes all the difference.